Hello bookworms! Today I'm going to be sharing my October wrap-up with you. So I read quite a few books in October. I read a good amount of novels, and then toward the end of the month I just got in the mood to read Star Wars stuff, so I read quite a few Star Wars comics as well. But I'm going to go ahead and start with the books. So I read 14 books and 7 graphic novels this month. Starting with Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I absolutely adored this book. It takes place in the same universe as Caraval. Stephanie says that you don't necessarily have to read the Caraval trilogy before reading Once Upon a Broken Heart, but I would very strongly recommend that you do, because there will be Easter eggs that you'll just really enjoy. You won't get the connections from it that you will if you had read the first series already. There are some character cameos which were really exciting, and I just really enjoyed this story. We're following a character named Evangeline Fox, and we're also following Jax, who's the Prince of Hearts, who we do meet in the Caraval series. In this one, Evangeline is in love with this guy, and then he is set to marry her sister. So she ends up making a deal with Jax, who is one of the Fates, because she wants their wedding to not happen because she's in love with him. Jax ends up stopping the wedding, but in a very terrible way, which makes her feel really awful. And then she ends up getting sent up to the Magnificent North, which is a different area of this world. It is absolutely beautiful, and also just like, look at this map. How amazing is this map? And while she's there, there's a prince that is looking for a bride. So Evangeline is sent, and she's going to meet him as like a potential suitor. I loved this story so much. Stephanie's writing style always just really works for me. If you didn't like the writing style in the Caraval series, then you probably aren't going to like Once Upon a Broken Heart either. But I really enjoyed that series, and I really loved this first book. I believe I think Stephanie said that it is at least a duology. She's not sure if it's going to be 2 or 3 books, but it's definitely going to be at least 2. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where the story's going. This one read very much like a fairy tale, which is something that I really enjoy. But unlike other fairy tales, I found that a lot of the elements of the story were kind of unpredictable. So there were things that were happening where I would be like, well, that's not going to happen, and then it would happen, or things where I would be like, well, this is what's happening here, and then that wouldn't be the case either. So it was really nice to read a fairy tale that had a lot of unexpected twists and turns. I really like the main character, Evangeline, and I really like Jax and just the Fates in general. I think it's such an interesting world that Stephanie's created. I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. Next, I finally read Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, and this is an adult fantasy thriller that I've been really looking forward to reading since it came out. So I do have to say that I feel like this book is pretty overhyped. I did enjoy it, but it's not like a new favorite for me. Like, I feel like a lot of people were like, this is the best book ever, this is a new favorite, and I just like didn't get that feeling from it at all. I thought it was pretty good, but I wasn't like, this is life-changing in any way. We're following a character named Alex who gets chosen to like go to Yale and get involved in all of these secret societies and kind of like monitor the activities of them. And she's also able to speak to ghosts, but there are some like pretty horrific things that happen in this book, so you might want to look up trigger warnings in case you still haven't read it and want to. There were a couple of scenes in it where I was like, did not need to read that, or like that was very detailed and no thank you. I think the beginning portion of the book was a little bit slow and it took me a little while to get into, but then the end had me really hooked. Like, I really want to know what's going to happen next. I will definitely read the next book in the series, but I don't like this nearly as much as other people do, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. Then I read The King of Crows by Libba Bray. This is the 4th and final book in the Diviner series. I really love the Diviner series. I do have to say though, books 1, 2, and 3 were all like amazing 5-star reads for me, and while I do think that this one wrapped up the story in a satisfying way, it felt like getting from point A to point B was a little bit rushed. And one of the things that I really dislike in books is when all of the characters are separated, and that's usually something that kind of happens in like book 2, but that was the case in this final book. A lot of the main characters were in different places throughout the story until like very far into it. I just really would have liked they were like together To be fair though, this series does have a pretty big cast of characters, so I understand that like maybe it would have been a little bit clunky to have all of them in the same place, but I still think I would have liked that a little bit better. This is like a spooky kind of paranormal series. It largely took place in New York City in the first couple of books, and then in this fourth one we're kind of traveling because the problem that they're dealing with is a bit bigger scale, but they are ultimately like, this is their ultimate showdown with the King of Crows. They have to try to kind of get rid of him once and for all. I definitely enjoyed reading it, and I really liked getting to see the characters that I like know and love once again, but I didn't love it as much as the other installments in the series, but it was still like a good solid read, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Then I read Bloody Rose by Nicholas Eames. This is the second book in the Band series, the first one being Kings of the Wilds, and the first one is one of my favorite books of all time. I reread that one in August because I wanted to read it right before reading Bloody Rose, and I'm so glad that I did because there were so many connections between the two books that I think I would have forgotten about if I hadn't reread Kings of the Wild so close to reading this one. This is a companion novel, so we're following a completely different set of characters, and despite the book being called Bloody Rose, Rose is not our main character. Our main character is Tam, who is a bard, and she works at a bar, and then she ends up kind of joining Rose's band and leaving with them and touring. This is another case where Kings of the Wild personally worked better for me. I was really curious how I was going to feel because I feel like a lot of people have said that Bloody Rose is like so much better, and I just disagree with that. I still loved it, but I really, really, really loved Kings of the Wild. Some of the things that worked better for me in Kings of the Wild are that there's a main objective right off the bat. So like right in, it might even be the first chapter, but I think it's chapter 2. Like you learn right away what the characters are going to be doing. Whereas in this book, things are a bit more meandering, and it's not really until like halfway through the book that you're like, okay, this is the thing that's going to be happening in this book. You're kind of just like along for the ride, which makes sense because in the first one we're following mercenaries who are past their prime, and in this one we're following mercenaries who are in the height of their careers. They're like in the best shape that they've been in. They're super popular at the moment, which is part of why I think I like the first one better, because this is less relatable to me. I'm more of a person that likes to kind of be home, and like I'm past that point in my life. So I did really like a lot of the characters. I do think that Rose is a little bit of an unlikable character, which is totally fine. Like she's definitely interesting and she has a really compelling story, but I don't like her, if that makes sense. I did really like Tam, and I also love Free Cloud. He is my favorite one in this book. But it was a lot of fun. Like I liked seeing all of the monsters that they were fighting. The progression of the story from the first one, like the overarching plot, I thought that took a really interesting turn. This book also made me cry. I was so sad when something happened in this book. There were also cameos of characters from the first book, so that I also really enjoyed, but overall I didn't love it as much as Kings of the Wilds, and I gave this one 4 stars. Then I read Edgedancer by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 2.5 in the Stormlight Archive series. I read this one because I really want to read Oathbringer before the end of the year, and I've been telling myself that I wouldn't read Oathbringer until I read Edgedancer, so I finally did that. It ended up being much quicker than I anticipated. It's a novella, but it's like 300 pages, so I thought it would take me like a little bit, but I actually ended up reading the whole thing in one day. In this one, we're following a character named Lift, who is going to, I think, become a bigger character in the main series, but this is like really where you get her backstory and kind of get a little bit familiar with her and her personality. Have to say, don't love her. This was not my favorite thing that I've read by Brandon Sanderson by any means, and I'm glad that I did read it because I am excited to like see how it ties into the rest of the Stormlight Archive, which I adore. I'm also a little bit worried knowing that Lift is going to become a bigger character. Like I'm hoping that we don't get too much of her perspective because I just really don't care for her. I thought it was an interesting story. I like the world, so it was enjoyable, but I didn't love it the way that I love the main series. So I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Then I read Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers, both by Tolkien. These are books 1 and 2 in the Lord of the Rings series. I've read these in the past, so this is actually a reread for me. I enjoyed them so much. I just love these books. Like, I love these books and I also love these movies. And I also really want to watch the movies again now, even though Andrew and I like just watched the extended editions like kind of recently. I'm already ready to watch them again. I had wanted to reread these this year, and then part of the reason why I ended up reading them so close together is because my friend Bethany was also rereading them, and she was hosting live shows to discuss the books over on her channel, which is Beautifully Bookish Bethany, and she invited me to join. So I was like, oh my gosh, I would love to, but also that means I need to read 2 Lord of the Rings books in like 5 days. And I did. I don't know how, but I did it. But I really enjoyed both of them once again. There are so many things that I always forget, like reading the books. First of all, I forget how much Tom Bombadil is in book 1 because he's not in the movies, and I definitely watch the movies like a lot more than I read the books. And I also always forget how like Frodo actually waits quite a while before he, and when I say quite a while, I mean like decades before he actually heads out on his adventure. Whereas in the movie, they make it seem like, you know, Bilbo has his party and then like next day Frodo's out. And it's actually like, that's just like not the right timeline, but I get why they did that. So that was really fun to just like compare and contrast the movie because it's been a while since I've done that. And then for the second book, Two Towers, I also had forgotten how the first half of the book we're not with Frodo and Sam at all. We're following everyone else in the Fellowship, and then it's not until the second half of the book that we actually get Frodo and Sam's story. But if you want to hear very in-depth thoughts about this, you can go back and watch the live show on Bethany's channel, so I'll leave that down below. And both of these were 5-star reads for me. Then I read The Bane Chronicles by Cassandra Clare, Sarah Reese Brennan, and Maureen Johnson. This is actually the only Shadowhunter book that I hadn't read. It's a collection of short stories all focusing on Magnus Bane, who is a warlock within the Shadowhunter world. Magnus is one of my absolute favorite characters, so I don't know why it took me so long to read this, but I do have to say it was published, I want to say it was published in like 2013, so it's one of the older books in the series, and I think it's honestly one of the weakest short story collections. I think some of the later ones have been so much better. There are definitely stories in each of them that are very hit or miss, but I found that there were more stories in this one that I didn't really care for than there are in some of the other collections. And then there are some other ones that were like so good that I really loved. So it's kind of hard to rate it. I think I ended up giving it like a 3 overall because there was just like such a wide range of ratings for me in here, and it left me overall with like a very middling kind of feeling. So now there are officially no Shadowhunter books left that I haven't read that are currently out. So I feel good about that, at least. I'm glad that I finally got to this one. It was actually on my like 10 books I have to read in, I want to say like 2016, and obviously I didn't. So it was high time that I got to this one. Then I read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. This is the first book in a YA thriller mystery series, and I really liked it. We're following a main character named Pippa, and Pippa goes to high school, and in her town there was a murder that happened 5 years prior. She like knew the person that ended up being found guilty of the case, and she just like never felt like that was right. So she ends up doing a thesis project on this murder that happened and ends up like kind of reopening the case and investigating some leads that maybe the police didn't find the first time around because things kind of seemed clear cut. Not really, but like I think that they just kind of wanted an answer. So Pippa and the brother of the supposed murderer end up teaming up together and investigating what's going on and interviewing people who were around during that time. And it was really interesting. I ended up listening to this one on audio, which I think was like a really good way to go about it because there are like I said, a lot of interviews. Kind of just reminded me of like when I was obsessed with Serial, like it was kind of like that. And I put the second and third books on hold from the library on audio when I was probably like 5 or 6 chapters into this one because I could already tell that I was excited for the next ones. And unfortunately, I'm still waiting. I'm really hoping that they'll come off hold in November, but we'll see. I'm usually like pretty good at guessing who is the person that is actually guilty, and I guessed someone right away. And then we later met someone else and I was like, ooh, now I don't know. Like now I actually feel like this person could be involved. And then with the outcome, I was just like, wow, I love it. while I do think that it was like a little bit predictable with who it was, I think like the journey getting there was unpredictable, and like the reasoning behind things was really interesting and unfolded in a very satisfying way. So I'm very much looking forward to reading the next ones. I really, really liked this one. I gave it 4 stars. Then I read In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead, and this is a thriller novel that takes place partially in the past, partially in the present. We're following 6 college friends who all went to school together, and they are going back for a college reunion. But while they were there, one of their best friends got murdered. One of their other friends was the accused murderer, though he was eventually found innocent, but though it obviously like kind of changed his life. And now that they're going back, the brother of their friend actually works at the school, and he really wants to find out what happened to his sister. So it's really interesting. I absolutely love this. It has major dark academia vibes. Personally, have to say, I liked this thriller a whole lot more than I liked Ninth House. This is kind of like what I was expecting from Ninth House. I felt like this was just very gripping from the first page. I was so invested. None of the characters are likable. Like, they're all terrible people, but I also like couldn't look away. I had to know what was happening, and I had so many theories for what was going on. And in this one, I actually didn't guess the way that things were going to wrap up. But I really like the direction that the story took. It's probably one of the best thrillers that I've ever read. I think a lot of thrillers can end up being kind of forgettable, but this one is definitely going to be sticking with me for a while, and I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. Then I read Kingdom of the Cursed by Carrie Maniscalco. This is the second book after Kingdom of the Wicked, which I read earlier this year and just completely fell in love with. I love this story. And this second book was so good. Just adored it. I don't want to give away any spoilers because I feel like even disclosing the setting of this book is a spoiler in itself, but following Amelia's journey, I could not get enough of this. It was just so fantastic. Also, as a little bit of a disclaimer, the first book definitely reads more like kind of older YA, and then the second book is just like flat out new adult. It's very smutty. There are a lot of steamy scenes in this book, but I really enjoyed it. I love these characters so much, and I'm so interested in this story that Carrie is telling. It's a trilogy, so there's one more book that's going to be coming out next year, and I'm devastated that I have to wait an entire year to get the next installment because I really want it now. This is definitely like a new favorite series for me from this year, and I ended up giving the second book 5 stars. Then I read Archangel's Kiss by Nalini Singh. This is the second book in the Guild Hunter series, and we're following Elena and Raphael. It's an urban fantasy series. I really enjoyed the first one, and the second one was just as enjoyable. I ended up listening to this one on audio too. In this one, we have a different villain that they are facing, and I really liked the progression of the relationship between Elena and Raphael. The first one ends kind of crazy, and then this second one is just so good, and I'm so excited for the next one to see like what's gonna happen to them next. Since it's the second book, I don't feel like I can say too much about it without it really being spoilery, but I really enjoyed the first one and I really enjoyed this one. There are 14 books in the series. The 14th one like just came out very recently, so I have a lot of catching up to do, and I'm glad that I have so many to get invested in, and I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. Then I decided to update my Star Wars Google Doc where I have like everything listed out in canon order so I can see like what I need to complete to be up to date on that universe. There's a lot that I still need to read, so I kind of just like got on a little bit of a kick, and I decided that I am going to read the middle grade books as well. So I read one of them this month. It was called Star Wars Choose Your Own Destiny, and this one was Obi-Wan and Anakin. This was by Cavan Scott. I thought this one was okay. I didn't love it. I'm obviously also not the target audience for it. I'm just reading it because I want to read everything in the canon universe. I also have to say that I was kind of horrible at choosing paths because it's choose your own adventure. So you'll like read a section and then at the end it'll give you a choice like, do you want to do this or do you want to do this? And only one of those choices will lead to the story continuing. So you can either pick the right thing and then move on and then you'll get another choice, or if you pick the wrong thing, you get to like another passage and then it just says the end, and then it says like, can you help Anakin and Obi-Wan make better choices? So then you have to like go back. You can either go back to the beginning or you can go back to where you were. I went back to where I was because I wasn't going to reread everything over again. That would be a little bit too repetitive for my liking. So it was fine. Like I read it very, very quickly. It was actually, I have Amazon Prime, so it was actually free to read on Amazon Prime, which is also why I was like, all right, why not? Definitely not my favorite, but now I can cross it off my list. So I gave this one 2 stars. Then moving into Star Wars comics, I read Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, The Dark Temple. This is by Matthew Rosenberg, and I believe that this comes right before the video game called Jedi Fallen Order. I really enjoyed this comic. I thought it was very interesting. We're following 2 timelines. There's a past timeline and a present timeline, and it takes place on this planet where there is a temple that's there. The majority of it takes place in the past. So we go back and we see like all of the events that unfolded at this temple before it's been rediscovered now in the present timeline. There's this seemingly like corrupt company that wants to go and like excavate into this temple and like find out everything that's there. And then there are these other people who it's technically their land and they have been trying to protect this temple and they are trying to keep that corporation out. So 2 Jedi end up getting sent to keep track of what's going on there, but they end up getting separated. One of them stays with the corporation, one of them stays with the people who live in that area. And the way that the story unfolds is really interesting. I wasn't expecting it to go the way that it did. I've never played Jedi Fallen Order before, so I was not familiar with any of the characters besides like, you know, when they're seeing the Jedi Council, like obviously I know those people, but the main characters of the story were not characters that I knew. And I like pretty easily got invested in what was going on, and it was fun to see like something different within the Star Wars universe. So I gave that one 4 stars. Then I read Star Wars Adventures, The Clone Wars Battles. This one's by Michael Morici, and this one is actually published by IDW instead of Marvel. Most of the Star Wars comics that I read are Marvel comics, but IDW has put out some canon Star Wars comics as well, and this is one of them. I thought that this was okay. We're just following some clone troopers during the Clone Wars. I liked the artwork a lot. It was very colorful, but we're basically just following clone troopers during the Clone Wars, and we do get cameos from characters that we know from Star Wars universe. Like we see Anakin, we see Obi-Wan. It just like goes through like a couple of different battles that happen during the Clone Wars that we don't see in the TV show, the movie, or in the prequels. I thought this was fine, but nothing spectacular, and I gave this one 3 stars. Then I read Star Wars Age of Rebellion Villains. This one is by Greg Pak, and this one I really enjoyed. So this is a mini series that they did. It was an 8-issue series, and 4 of the issues focused on heroes, which I previously read, and then 4 of the issues focused on villains. So we get a story about Darth Vader, we get a story about Tarkin, we get a story about Jabba the Hutt, and then we also get a story about Boba Fett. And I thought these were excellent. The Boba Fett story was so good. So good. I also really liked the Tarkin story. I felt like that really captured him. The Jabba story was really interesting as well. And obviously I just love Darth Vader, so that was also pretty good. The artwork is different between each issue. I think that each issue had a different artist. Overall, I thought it was a really fun collection, and I liked these little kind of one-shot stories about these characters that I love. So I gave this one 4 stars. Then I read Han Solo, Imperial Cadet by Robbie Thompson. This is another limited series. So this was a 5-issue series that was collected into a graphic trade. And I actually thought this one was pretty fun too. I didn't really have very high expectations going into it because I don't love the Solo portion of the Star Wars universe. That movie was not my favorite, and other properties that I've like read that surround it have also not been my favorite, but I thought that this was pretty fun. So basically what happens is in the beginning, Han and Kira are on Corellia and they end up getting separated, and Han wants to get back there to save her, so he enlists in the Imperial Academy so that he can become a pilot and go back to Corellia and save Kira. It's a young Han, so he's like even snarkier than we know him to be in like A New Hope. But it was really fun just like following his adventures and just seeing him interact with people in the Empire and like constantly defy them. Just entertaining. I also really like the group of cadets that he ends up like befriending, and they have a couple of fun adventures, and I thought it was cute. I gave this one 3.5 stars. Then I'll talk about the next two together. So these are also IDW Star Wars comics. I read Tales from Vader's Castle and Return to Vader's Castle. These are both by Cavan Scott, and these were kind of challenging for me to rate. Each issue tells a short story, like a spooky kind of story in the world of Star Wars. So concept-wise, I think it is phenomenal. I just absolutely love the idea of this. I love that Disney and Lucasfilm like decided that this was fine to publish, because they can be a little bit kind of not the most experimental when it comes to something like Star Wars. I thought conceptually it was like 5 stars. The artwork is absolutely amazing. Like the artwork 100% gets 5 stars from me, and the colorist did such a great job. Everything is like very neon and also like black, so there's a lot of like contrasting colors, and I felt like the colors just really like captured the mood of the story. But then I have to say, like story wise, I felt like the writing and the stories were more on like a 3-star level for me. I thought it was like fun to read something different, but there were also some very weak issues in the book. And they're actually coming back and they're doing a 3rd volume of this, so I definitely will read that when it does come out, but I didn't love them as much as I had hoped that I would. So like overall, I think they were kind of like 3.5 stars. And then lastly, I read Vader Dark Visions by Dennis Hopeless. This was fine. This was another instance of a graphic trade that wasn't a continuous story. It was kind of like a bunch of one-shots, and all of them involved Darth Vader. So they also weren't like told from Darth Vader's perspective, and Darth Vader really wasn't like the main character. So it was interesting in the sense that each issue was told from like an outside perspective of someone that we've never met before, and their impression of Darth Vader based on things that they have seen or are currently seeing. In that instance, it was interesting, but overall it wasn't like anything groundbreaking. Just wasn't my favorite. I ended up giving it 2.5 stars. And now I'm finally done. So that's everything that I read in October. I read quite a lot, pretty happy with it, though I didn't have too many things outside of like rereads and Kingdom of the Curse and Once Upon a Broken Heart that were like absolute favorites. I think there were a lot of things that were like pretty enjoyable, and then there were a lot of things that I was pretty medium on, and also some things that I like didn't really care for but just like read because I kind of felt like I had to. But I'm still glad with like the volume of what I read. I'm hoping that I will have some higher ratings in November because I have a lot on my TBR that I'm very excited for. Oh, I also forgot to mention that I started reading Malice. It's on my night table, so I don't have it next to me, but I'm like 200 pages into Malice, so you'll hear about that in November. So let me know what you read in October. Let me know like what some of your favorite things were, and that's all that I have for this video, so I will see you guys soon in a new one. Bye!